Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is Bloomberg Businessweek Daily, reporting from the magazine that helps global leaders stay ahead with insight on the people, companies, and trends shaping today's complex economy. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. The Bloomberg Businessweek Daily podcast with Carol Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
Today, we're going to bring you some of our favorite conversations from the event. We'll hear from leaders across the tech sector, including CEOs, podcasters, and even a Nobel laureate. First up this hour, we spoke with Anne Raimondi. She's the Chief Operating Officer of Asana.
I want to bring in Anne Raimondi. She is COO of Asana, the productivity platform. She joins us here on set at the Bloomberg Technology Summit. Shares of Asana fell by 20% on Wednesday. The company's first quarter results prompted a downgrade by HSBC, despite the fact that revenue came in right on the average analyst estimate. The company also, Carol, raised its full-year non-GAAP operating margin guidance as it was, quote, reflecting our confidence in our ability to drive durable, profitable growth, even in the face of macroeconomic uncertainty.
There's a lot coming at companies. Anne Raimondi is COO and head of business at Asana. Company has a $3.5 billion market cap, and she's here on site. Nice to have you here with us. How are you?
Great to be here. Good. It's so great to see both of you, and excited to be here at the conference.
It's great to have you here. We love the energy. Tell us, though, about this macro environment and the macro uncertainty that's still out there.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is just slowing down some of the bigger decisions that customers are making, whether that's like full-scale transformation or a lot of larger consolidation initiatives. But the bright spots we're seeing is companies are leaning really heavily into AI. And so that's where we are also really excited. We launched AI Studio, which is an add-on to the Asana platform. And that performed really well in Q1. And it didn't fully launch until sort of the second half of Q1. But that's where we're seeing a lot of customer excitement.
I'm glad you brought up AI because that's exactly where I want to go. I've been thinking a lot about what I heard from Dario Amodei over at Anthropic. I think it was just last week he told Axios that we could see some real workforce destruction in the next 1 to 5 years. AI could lead to 10 or 20% unemployment, and it could destroy about half of all entry-level white-collar jobs. If that happens, that would be really bad for companies that make productivity software like Asana.
Yeah, what we're seeing is, and you know, Anthropic is a very important partner of ours. Dustin, our founder and CEO, is quite involved there. There's the bigger concern of disruption of jobs. I think what we're seeing with our customers, though, is the ones that are kind of staying ahead, they see the opportunity right now is human and AI collaboration. Because as far as, you know, we're seeing, AI is not fully replacing entire jobs. I think what AI is really good at is automating a lot of tasks that right now could allow people to be more productive. So we're really focused on that. Yeah.
Do you see AI fully replacing jobs in the next 1 to 5 years, like Dario Amodei says?
I don't think I'm in the position to predict quite as well as Dario is, but I do think we see, you know, with our customers, what we see is they're very intentional of there are some jobs that are likely, the most likely to go away, the ones that are tasks that can be, and in some ways you want to be replaced by AI so people can be doing things that are more creative and more productive. I think there are some jobs that will be changed with AI, where AI is going to be an integral part of how people do their jobs. And then what we're hopeful for is that there's a whole set of new jobs that are created that only people can do. So I do think we're right in the midst of transformation at a rate that we probably haven't seen before. But what we're really focused on is like helping companies manage through that transition by enabling their existing employees to embrace AI in their workflows.
And one thing I want to ask you about is, I think all of a sudden, Tim and I feel it in terms of the use of AI, where it was kind of like, oh yeah, everybody else is using it, and all of a sudden we're really leaning in big time and finding it super productive.
Yes.
But that innovation or innovative cycle is moving really quickly.
Yep.
And I do wonder what it means for a company like you, where you are kind of facing that speed and then hoping to continue to differentiate yourself from everybody else who's also moving really fast.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we're seeing is, like, at least for our business, why we're investing so heavily in AI is that we do see a shift ultimately from seat-based in SaaS to consumption-based.
Yeah.
And so wanting to, be ahead of that. I think the other thing that we're really seeing that's important to sort of focus on is like, how can companies enable employees to understand how the LLMs work, be proactive in where they're applying and deploying
There's
AI.
a huge education cycle that needs to happen.
There really is. The other thing that we're seeing is, you were mentioning like now everyone's using it, but what we're also finding is that when it is very bottoms up and in every single tool and everybody's got a chatbot, companies actually aren't realizing either the productivity gains or the acceleration. The companies that are moving ahead are doing it in a very tops-down, coordinated way, which isn't always how technology's been adopted in the past.
Right.
But with AI, I think that strategic view on where you're going to deploy AI is really critical to actually realize the gains.
Let's talk a little bit about the macroeconomic environment. You've got a great view of the global economy. Where are you seeing strength? Where are you seeing weakness geographically?
Yeah, geographically for us, we're actually seeing quite a bit of strength internationally, in EMEA, in Japan.
Does that surprise
you? That does a bit given all the things in the macro, but I think for us in particular, the segments and the verticals that we're in outside of tech, a lot of companies are continuing to, invest in technology, invest intentionally in AI. We see that in manufacturing, energy, financial services, healthcare.
But is this a function of actual strength in those economies, or is it a function of these are the sectors that are finally adopting this technology? So the tech sector was the first sector to do that.
Yep.
Obviously, your core customer base. But now you're seeing your tools being adopted by other types of companies.
It's really the latter. Yeah, that they're really embracing, hey, how can they be intentional and proactive in not only adopting collaborative work management, but AI on top of that.
Okay.
I got to ask you just because today, the press conference from the White House, there's a lot said about Elon.
So 45 minutes at the Oval Office.
It was a long one. And it does feel like the bromance, the big tech bromance between President Trump and Elon Musk is over. Is that a good or bad thing for the tech community?
Oh, that's a big. I do not know if I am the expert to answer that question.
But I do wonder. He's on there, and he's. I think Elon is going out on social and being a little aggressive at this point after being like this. It seems like.
I think underlying what we should all be focusing on is, hey, with uncertainty in the global macro, what can we do to make sure the most important businesses and companies and innovations are being invested in and accelerating, right? Or a different way to say it for me is like, we're trying to figure out like, how do we control the controllables? And know that we're in a relatively volatile and political environment.
Yeah, to say the least.
Yeah.
Tim asked you about growth geographically, and I feel like we talked a lot about what's going on overseas. How do you describe the U.S. market right now and the willing to do the capital spend, whether it's on software, whether it's, that's your world, hardware, but what is kind of your take on that?
The sentiment we're hearing, especially from our larger customers, is a lot more intentionality, I would say. And
so they're aware, there's a budget.
There is. And then I think there's, again, depends on the sector.
Right.
They're trying to figure out from a priority standpoint, one, how much do you invest in AI and where? And then everything else technology-wise, I do think we're seeing a lot more movement towards consolidation, which really was sort of the after effects of like the technology bloat during the pandemic. Yeah.
Speaking of the tech, we're seeing inference and costs actually come down. Agentic workflow is making inroads. Job growth, particularly in tech, has been slow or is trending down. What does all this mean to your seat-based revenue model, and where really are we in that transition?
Yeah, I mean, we're actively looking to, sort of balance from a fully seat-based to a hybrid of seat-based and consumption-based. And we also think there's a subsegment of customers ultimately that may be spending more on consumption. And we're already seeing early signs of that probably in more like our mid-market customers who are now spending as much on seat as they are on AI and the credits. So I think that's like good, positive news in terms of a transition. And so we're, continuing to invest in how we might help customers sort of shift in that direction.
One last question is, I think something we talked about, all of these programs and AI, will make us more productive, no doubt about it. But going back to that idea of like, what jobs does it take, that head count, like ultimately, does it make us more productive? We don't need so many people. And then coming back to you guys, we're not going to need as much in terms of demand and product from everybody.
Yeah.
Is that cycle going to play out? Possibly?
One of the things, Dustin, our CEO and founder, often talks about is like, hey, what this evolution may look like, again, depending on the kind of company, what problems they solve, what products they bring to market, is that they will start to see a shift from payroll spend to sort of AI consumption spend. And Tim, you mentioned, hey, we're seeing costs come down. One of the things we really provide is choice for customers to actually transparently pick the models depending on the workflow, how complex
it is. So there's a menu of pricing.
And they can choose that. And so I think that's going to be really critical too, is like, it's not all models against, sort of like all problems, really being able to pick judiciously.
That's Anne Raimondi, the Chief Operating Officer of Asana.
You're listening to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek. Coming up, more conversations from our trip out west to the Bloomberg Tech Summit. I'm Carol Massar with Tim Stenovec.
This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome back to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek. Taking a look at some of our favorite conversations from the Bloomberg Tech Summit.
Up next, we hear from Florian Seibel, co-founder and CEO of Quantum Systems.
Carol, by early 2025, this was remarkable when I was preparing for this, drones were accounting to 60 to 70% of the damage and destruction caused to Russian equipment in the war. This is according to data from the UK-based think tank, the Royal United Services Institute.
I got to say, the way we think about warfare has definitely changed dramatically. And this is where Florian Seibel comes in. He's a former German Army helicopter pilot, an aeronautical engineer who a decade ago founded a company called Quantum Systems. It makes multi-sensor drones. Now, 90% of its sales go to the military sector, and it's provided thousands of drones to Ukraine specifically. And so we're kind of dying to talk to him.
Florian Seibel joins us from Italy. Florian, good to have you with us. I know there's a little bit of delay. We appreciate you taking the time and staying up a little late in Europe for us on Bloomberg Businessweek Daily. First big question that I have for you is, given what you know about Sunday's drone attack, were any of your drones actually used in that attack?
So what we know, not as in a way that they would act as being the ultimate weapon. All of the drones that we are building are used for ISR missions, which is intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So that means we are spotting potential targets. So our drones have wings. We have flight time of several hours, and then we fly deep into enemy territory. So we spot, and then other type of drones come in.
Do your drones ultimately replace the capabilities of aircraft such as the U-2 spy plane?
Well, there's a reason for every asset to have, and I think mostly war times are times of change and new doctrines are happening, and every war that is coming up will not start as the last one ended. So. I'm not really sure if the next war will be all about drones, but what I can say now, definitely it's a vehicle for Ukraine to fight off Russia because they did not have enough conventional weapons to take them to the battlefield the way Russia would have expected. So they were just very curious and using what they have, and that's where we are. This is technology changing the way things happen. Huh?
Well, that's where, Florian, I kind of want to go. I think after that drone strike by Ukraine and Russia, we had so many conversations in the newsroom about, oh my gosh, like warfare just continuing to change very dramatically. My dad and his three brothers all fought in World War II, A lot of man-to-man combat. It was just a very different type of warfare. We've seen the gamification of warfare. How does drones kind of make it safer on one level in terms of not putting people at the kind of right at the top, the front line, if you will, but at the same time make it easier for someone to flip a switch and send drones into combat?
You use the word that describes it quite well, which is gamification. it's using a lot of technology that was spilling over from adjacent industries like cell phone technology. You know, a lot of the small stuff, chips, batteries, cameras that they weren't just not available a few years ago to companies like us. And you know, the cell phone industry basically allowed us all to disrupt classical defense military companies, because now you know it's available to everybody, and China is very strong in that regard. And I think what has to happen now is we need to rebuild, specifically in the US, but also in Germany and Europe. We need to rebuild the industrial base to be capable of producing thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s of these units. It's not about like a few multi-$100 million aircraft anymore. It's about large numbers, attritable platforms. You know, you want to saturate your adversary, and there's companies like Quantum and Anduril in the US that are changing the rules how we play.
Florian, I am curious though, is there somebody, an entity, a country that you will not sell to?
Well, you know, in Germany, all of what we do is very regulated. And so we have a German export control authority, which is called BAFA, which is very much in line with NATO and the German governmental official position. And so we have to fulfill these guidelines and so it's basically impossible for us, you know, from a legal perspective, for example, to sell into countries like Iran and Russia and China. But also, you know, then that's the legal perspective on it. And then we as the founders and we together with our investors have made it very clear that even though if we could sell to certain countries, you know, we have to feel comfortable with that as a company. For example, Saudi Arabia is probably one of those countries that would be quite obvious that we could sell to, but we would probably have a discussion before we would do so.
You mentioned investors. The company is backed by Peter Thiel. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. Before we get there, I want to talk about the opportunity outside of Europe, because for much of the past 3 years, you have been selling your drones to Ukraine, but you did just open a 135,000 square foot facility here in California. What is the opportunity in the U.S. market?
I think that was a very smart decision, you know, to do that, because the U.S. DoD is the single largest Department of Defense in the world, and obviously Europe as a total is about the same size, but it's very fragmented into 26 member state countries. So going to the US and entering that single biggest market was a must-do for us. There were a lot of people saying it's going to be hard for a non-US company to do well, but I think we managed to do so. You know, I've spent 2 years of my life in the U.S., 1 year in high school, 1 year when I was trained as a professional helicopter pilot in Fort Rucker, Alabama. So I think I picked a little bit up of the way of how America works and what's the life over there and how the people do business. And so I was very lucky to hire an excellent CEO coming from the drone defense industry, and he was setting up Quantum Inc. in Moore Park, and he has been doing incredibly well. And so I think, you know, it's not the US or Europe. I think part of our mission is also to, in these uncertain times of what we see at the moment, where the US is trying to break away from Europe, that economic companies that are on the free market, act as a glue maybe to get us through these times, because, you know, the US has been always the biggest ally to Europe, especially what is coming up tomorrow, D-Day. You know, we want to pay back a little bit here. And so for me, it was a natural thing to go to the US.
Yeah. Okay, so we are Bloomberg, and we are always curious about interesting startups and as they are growing. And as Tim mentioned, you are backed by Peter Thiel. You just raised about $181 million, a financing round, valuing you at more than $1 billion. So kind of going into that unicorn status. When is the IPO? If there is one, will it be Europe? Will it be the United States? What will you guys do?
It's unclear at the moment. Right now, we're doing very well. We're probably going to raise 1 or 2 more rounds. You know, being on the capital market also means you're very transparent in what you do, and it's these big government contracts we are after. They're either 0 or 1, and we don't want to end up being the goal of speculative betting on us or against us on Wall Street. So I think we'll take like 1 or 2 more years, 1 or 2 more financing rounds, and then probably, as we are a German company, we could look into doing a European IPO. Or, as you said, New York Stock Exchange probably depends a little bit also on how well we do with our US facility. As you said, we have heavily invested in a 135,000 square foot. We need to fill that with business. We expect the US government to give us more contracts to pay back that we invest so heavily into the US now. And then it's an open decision, I would say, as of today.
Well, it's always, interesting. We talk so much about here we are in San Francisco, the heart of Silicon Valley, just nearby. Innovation, though, happens around the world. You are based in Munich. How does that startup environment differ there over in Europe, in Munich specifically, versus maybe elsewhere, versus the United States, for example?
Yeah, so having lived in the United States and having met a lot of U.S. investors in the last 6, 8, 10 years, you can definitely say that the spirit of go big or go home or think big is definitely a part of Silicon Valley culture. Whereas in Germany we have excellent engineering, I would say, at very decent price and cost of living. So I think there's an advantage for both locations to be. Obviously, especially in the beginning, I was always a little bit jealous looking at the amount and the number of companies that are still being founded in the US. So it's so much more and bigger than Europe. But I think we're catching up. What has happened in the last 2 or 3 years, it's clear for us now in Europe that we are on our own. We need to reinvent ourselves. We need to define who we are, who we want to be in that world. And Germany always has been the place of great world-leading tech companies. I think we have just not had that in the last 1 or 2 decades, and I think it's time to change that again, and we are ready to do that.
Hey, Florian, before we let you go, I know you're focused on these UAVs that are really about reconnaissance, but I want to pick your brain a little bit about the areas of innovation, especially here in the U.S., because back in March, the U.S. government awarded Boeing the new Air Force F-47 stealth fighter jet. There's sort of a lot of controversy around this because it's still going to be crew-based, though the president did say we'll be able to fly remotely. Should the U.S. right now, or should countries be investing in any crewed aircraft right now, or is the future 100%, in your view, UAV?
I think the future is unmanned. It's definitely about robotics and unmanned systems. The question is, how fast will that happen? I think the UK has just brought up a new defense policy. They call it 20-40-40, saying 20% will be or should be assets, classical assets like there used to be, so manned fighter jets, 40% ISR and intelligence, and 40% unmanned strike capabilities. So I think it's not either or. I think it's a combination, both, but definitely more than we used to see. And I don't know if the F-47 is going to be manned or unmanned. Probably these high-value assets will still be manned, but they will definitely not fly into enemy territory. I think they have a standoff capability. Extreme long-range radar range because they're so super expensive, but let's see. It's changing. Maybe the next war will be not fought on drones. Maybe it's in space.
That's Florian Seibel, co-founder and CEO of Quantum Systems.
You're listening to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek. Coming up, more conversations from our trip out west to the Bloomberg Tech Summit. I'm Carol Massar with Tim Stenovec.
This is Bloomberg.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Welcome back to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, taking a look at some of our favorite conversations from the Bloomberg Tech Summit.
Up next, we hear from RJ Scaringe, the CEO of Rivian.
All right, we've got a really great guest. We want to get right to him. RJ Scaringe is with us. He's, of course, head of the $16 billion market cap automaker. We're talking about Rivian. We talk about this company all the time with us at Bloomberg Tech Summit here in San Francisco. And we have Ed Ludlow, a member of our team, co-host of Bloomberg Technology, and who knows this company so well. Hey, one thing I want to start with, RJ, is there's a lot going on between Elon and Donald Trump. It seems like it's over. And it's not going well. So I'm just curious, have you been able to kind of win market share or anything as a result of kind of Elon's position at Doge? And I'm just curious how it might play out here.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd just say
anti-Tesla mode.
Yeah, I think in general, it's the thing that's been surprising is just how politicized a lot of things have become. So electric vehicles become politicized, specific brands within the electric vehicle space are politicized. And so what we've tried to do as a brand really focused on is to focus on what we stand for, the products, their attributes. And, there's the famous Michael Jordan quote, which is, we have Republicans, he said, Republicans and Democrats both buy Nikes. And it's the same thing with Rivian. So I'll go to Rivian events. I was just in New York. And, it's such a beautiful mix of backgrounds, perspectives, cultures that are drawn to what we're building as a brand.
Right.
And we're about to launch what we call our R2, which is a lower priced vehicle. It starts at $45,000. And that product will even, broaden the aperture even more. And so
I think what Carol's asking is if there's net positive effect for you from this environment on sales and pre-orders.
So
I think
that's what she was asking.
I think you're benefiting from this environment.
The anti-Tesla movement, have you benefited from it?
I think there are a lot of customers who are looking for a brand that they want to connect with. So that we're seeing that for sure.
Sort of on that, thinking about the politics of this, rare earths. I mean, you and the team have been really clear that you've been working to educate the Trump administration when it comes to the complexities around processing rare earths here in the U.S. Are you still concerned about accessibility to rare earths?
Well, first I'd say I appreciate that the administration recognizes this as an issue. That's important. And I think that we've done a lot of work and spent a lot of time with the administration on this topic. I think this is perhaps one of the biggest topics surrounding the trade tensions with China. It's well documented that a vast majority of the world's processing for these rare earth metals happens in China. So this is something that we're going to continue to be very focused on, continue to have concerns about until we start to see it really move.
What's your backup plan?
We have many backup plans.
If you can't get access to these rare earths for some reason over an extended period of time, which are essential in making EVs and batteries, what do you do?
So what we've done, what we've spent time on over the last several months is to build alternative supply chains, but they're not elegant because they're not set up for scale, and a lot of people beyond us are also trying to build these alternative supply chains. So I think the hope is that in the short to medium term we see this open back up. Right. And I think in the long term, we're probably going to see both investment into building rare earth capacity outside of China, and then innovation to remove rare earths from products. So if you take in an electric vehicle, the reason this is so important is the motors use permanent magnets, and the permanent magnets have rare earth metals. Things like dysprosium. All those things on the periodic table that we forget they're on there.
Yeah.
But those rare earth metals are needed in the magnets. But you can create an electromagnet to power the rotor. The rotor's the spinning part of the motor, but then you've got to get power to the rotor. So that you can do it with a brush, you can do it with induction. So it's a more complex motor product, but it does remove the complexity of global trade around rare earths.
But is that a little time away?
Yeah, it's not. You can't flip your design overnight, but I would say I think a lot of the auto industry is going to start finding innovative ways that are perhaps maybe a little more expensive that reduce the reliance on rare earths.
People wonder how nimble you are, though. Like, do you remember when we first met 7 years ago? With respect, your suppliers really wouldn't engage with you because of scale.
Yeah.
So, if you have had to pivot a little bit because of policy, particularly for planning for R2, have you been able to A, get your suppliers to listen to you, and B, affect a change?
Yeah, we've talked about this a lot. I mean, our relationship with suppliers and the leverage we have with those suppliers is so much stronger today with R2 and what's to come than what we had, in 2019 or 2020, even 2018. But I'd say the thing that's really helpful for us in R2 is it's not as if this is a surprise. We saw, if you going into summer of last year, we saw some of these tensions already rising between the United States and China, and that was as we were planning for and sourcing R2. So we contemplated and in many ways anticipated a lot of these situations we're now dealing with in terms of tariffs, in terms of trade restrictions happening. So in the medium to long term, we're pretty well covered. In the short to medium term, if things get shut off, that's really challenging. And so that's where I think the rare earth challenge is, that if this happens where it's off, it just creates a lot of pressure on a very thin non-China supply chain.
I still think there's a lot of interest in Rivian. What I hear is there's also a lot of interest in Orso, your micromobility spin-off. Would you consider kind of de-risking yourselves a little bit by allowing outside investors to write you a check into that venture and get you some capital or de-risk your own balance sheet in that respect?
Yeah, so we spun this micromobility portion of Rivian out, and we actually raised outside capital. So we brought $105 million in at the start of the year.
Which was from Eclipse.
Which is from Eclipse, exactly.
Right.
And so it's now independently financed from Rivian. And it's a really exciting set of products. We're going to show those products in the fall.
But would the venture look at even further outside capital to get going a little bit?
We could, yeah, we could. But we're really happy with where it is. It's exciting to build a new business with the strength of all the Rivian technologies is starting point.
That's RJ Scaringe, Rivian CEO.
Coming up next, we hear from Ahmed Aldal, VP of Generative AI at Meta.
I want to just kind of set this up because Bloomberg News recently reporting artificial intelligence coding startup Replit is in talks, or was in talks, maybe still in talks, we'll find out, with investors for a new funding round that would almost triple its valuation to about $3 billion. That was according to people familiar with the matter. And so that was really underscoring Silicon Valley investors' appetite for companies using AI for software development. I do feel like, Tim, that's the phase we've moved into.
Oh, let's ask him. We've got Amjad Massar here, the founder and CEO of Replit. He joins us here at the Bloomberg Technology Summit 2025 in San Francisco. Comment on the fundraising and where you are in that. Can you confirm the report?
We're always in talks with investors. We've grown a lot. We've grown just this year over 10x.
Top line? You're talking about top line growth. Wow.
So you're always in talks until you're not, and you go public as a company. So
Yes.
You're always in talks until you're not.
Yeah.
Are you currently raising this round?
Things are moving really fast.
Okay.
Well,
so even when you're in talks and then you grow that much, it's like,
Amjad, talk to us about that growth. Like, who is it that's tapping into what you guys are doing specifically?
Right. Yeah. So, it's all sorts of people. So Replit, as opposed to say, Cursor, Windsurf, or Claude Code, or other things, we're trying to make it so that anyone is a programmer. So I could encourage anyone in the audience to go to the App Store on their phone and start making software. So the kind of users that we have at companies tend to not be the software engineer. We do have engineers. But for example, product managers, for the first time, can go from an idea to a product without even talking to an engineer.
How does that happen?
So we created a software development agent. It was the first software development agent on the market. Now we got a lot of copycats, but basically it takes the user command, breaks down the problem into different tasks, starts coding the different files, runs the program, tests the program, takes a screenshot, looks at it, and then talks to the user, hey, did I build what you told me to build? And then there's a conversation with the user.
I just did a big piece on Duolingo, and so this is fresh on my mind.
They're a customer.
They are a customer. So that's interesting because what I read was they're known for languages, but they had chess is a new area where they're branching out into, and you can learn how to do chess on the platform. Apparently, it was created by a designer and a product manager. They used a program called Cursor. Would that be a competitor to you? Would it work in tandem?
They work in tandem. We compete on the margins, but they work in tandem. A lot of time, people start with Replit, create a prototype, take it to Cursor, they iterate on it.
So if product managers and designers are doing this, where does that leave software engineers?
Yeah. I think software engineers are going to be like a layer deeper. So you always need the infrastructure engineer, you always need the platform engineer, the AI engineer. And so the specialized low-level engineer's job is safe. But the people creating products, anyone can make it now.
But their jobs, these specialized folks might be safe, but maybe you don't need as many of them as you do now?
That's safe to assume. But net, there's going to be a lot more developers. They might not have gone to computer science school, but day to day, they're making software.
Wow.
But that's a big shift. Because I just feel like the story that we have said for many years now is software engineers, coders, you guys are safe, right? Because every company is a technology company, and every company needs coders and figuring out how to do systems. You're saying no, that's not the case anymore.
Well, let me put it this way.
Because everybody can be a coder.
Let me put it this way. Every company in the world, even today, is limited by how many software engineering resources they have. That is one of the limiting factors to growth in our economy in general.
Right.
And so we're basically removing that limiting factor, and I think that's gonna create a lot better products and services. Companies like Duolingo can go from language to chess, and a lot of new startups are going to be created. I see startups on our platform every day. And so the economy is just going to be a lot more dynamic.
Are you doing the inference on your platform? Or do you have to contract that out to a third party?
So so meaning what kind of models do we use? So we use a collection of models. Some of them we trained and hosted, but we rely a lot of it on Anthropic. We rely on some Google models like Gemini, Flash, and Claude Code. These are what's happening in the LLM space is that there's so many tools out there, open source, closed source, whatever. As an application layer company, our job is to create the best product possible. Whether we pick model off the shelf or we train our model, it's engineering. It's not AI research. It's engineering.
Amjad, what I am hearing is that what your tool would be really incredible for is for smaller size companies who maybe can't afford to hire software engineers. I have an idea. Tell me, where is your business, the growth the most? Is it small size, mid size, large size companies? Give us an idea. I just got about 45 seconds.
So you're right. Small size is where we're seeing the most growth. But in terms of contract value, it tends to be mid-market and enterprise. We have Fortune 500 companies, and the way they use it is to unblock. Everyone in the enterprise has ideas to improve the business, but there's limited number of engineers. And so these people are seeking the tools, and it's starting to be productive with them. And Replit is one of the big tools in that.
That's Ahmed Aldal, Vice President of Generative AI at Meta.
That does it for this hour of Bloomberg Businessweek. Next hour, we'll bring you even more from the Bloomberg Tech Summit out in San Francisco this past week. I'm Carol Massar with Tim Stenovec.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome back to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, taking a look at some of our favorite conversations from the Bloomberg Tech Summit. First up this hour, we spoke with Wendell Snyder. She's the CEO of Thistle Technologies.
There's this common refrain that if it's connected to the internet, Carol, it can be hacked.
It feels like a really smart thing to be kind of keep in mind.
Okay, we know computers and our email accounts can be hacked, but what about baby monitors, doorbell cameras, routers, and yes, even the humble washing machine?
Listen, if it ain't working, we're going to have some problems. This is where Wendell Snyder comes in. She's the CEO over at Thistle Technologies. They specialize in security infrastructure for devices. Now, Wendell has led teams building protections into phones, laptops, desktops, and web browsers. She's done this at companies. You're going to know who they are. We're talking about Apple. We're talking about Intel. We're also talking about Microsoft and Mozilla. She's featured in Businessweek's One to Watch in Technology. It's a guide for the people you'll be hearing more about in the near future. She joined us here at the Bloomberg Tech Summit in San Francisco. Help me understand how this solution works, because you're selling your solution to the companies that then consumers buy from. So you're B2B, correct?
We are.
You're B2B. So what is the infrastructure that you create that protects my doorbell from being hacked?
Sure. So we build the capabilities that the device developers can incorporate into their products that allow them to reduce the attack surface of these devices, which means the number of entry points into the system, or the areas that are most vulnerable. Like the device is most vulnerable during update. And update is one of those things that's really hard to get right and really easy to get wrong.
Yeah.
So because it gets implemented differently in every different environment, that's one of the areas that we target as an area to provide a lot of security resilience. Additionally, validating the update is coming from where you expect it to, by evaluating a cryptographic signature on it that could be validated by a key that's stored in hardware.
Wait a minute, I don't even think about that being like a cyber attack, but I guess that would be a great place for people to do it. How often does that happen?
Well, the FBI recently released a report that showed that organized crime was using vulnerable routers, home routers,
right,
to string together bot networks that were basically, these devices never get updated. So they're going to persist for indefinitely.
When I talk to people like you, I selfishly always ask about your own security hygiene and like what products that you actually personally incorporate into your life and what you avoid.
So for the home user, it's incredibly difficult because a lot of these devices, you're just it's a black box. You just get what you get, and there's not much you can do to mitigate risk from those devices. At the enterprise, you've got a little bit more of an opportunity. But as a former CISO myself, they're difficult to manage. They are uninspectable. If there's an update available, it's very often very difficult to get it deployed. It's actually a struggle.
What would you say to a consumer who says, okay, well, Ring doorbell, it's owned by Amazon. They're a legit company. Eero is, I think, owned by Amazon also. It's legit. Amazon will take the necessary precautions to protect me. What would you say to that?
Amazon has a very large, very good security team. That's fantastic. But there's so many devices out there. I'm wearing like 2 just from like here down, right? I've got 2 devices over here.
So you got an Oura Ring for our listeners and an Apple Watch as well.
Exactly. But in your home, you might have a smart TV. You might have a baby monitor. You might have even smart ovens. There's so many different kinds of devices. Your printer. They might not all get the same level of security rigor that your Ring doorbell might. That's a device that's been compromised.
I would welcome a hacker to make my printer work better. That's what I would welcome.
So you're talking about hacks, right? Like, why do I care about my printer? What is it?
They're already messed up on my printer, truly.
But is it a case that it doesn't work? Or are you saying that there's a security thing we need to be concerned about?
Well, the printer in the enterprise or at home is the place where we take all of our most sensitive documents and store them on paper, right? So if you're an attacker and you're sitting on that printer, you have access to that information. But even that is not necessarily what they're doing on your printer. If you compromise the printer, you're using it to launch an attack against a more sensitive system. And now, since you're on the network, you've got a more privileged position.
So it's the weakest link, essentially.
Exactly.
So I take back what I said about a hacker going into my printer. I do not welcome that.
All right, so help me out here, because I have a husband who loves technology. And so our lights, our, heating system, like music, everything is controlled by something. And it kind of drives me crazy. But I mean, does that make a home more vulnerable? Or like, how do you, what things shouldn't we automate or use technology?
So I can tell you to go set up a device network and keep it separated from the network that your laptops use. But that's not really practical advice because most consumers can't set that up. The real emphasis should be on the folks that build those. So for example, in Europe, the Cyber Resiliency Act is forcing these device makers to make sure that they're doing security updates, make sure that they are building security resilience in from the start.
Should we have that here in the U.S.?
We definitely need to make sure that device makers are doing the work.
That's Wendell Snyder, CEO of Thistle Technologies.
Up next, we'll hear from Jennifer Doudna. She is founder of the Innovative Genomics Institute and Nobel laureate in chemistry.
I want to get an update on where we are in your view with gene editing technology. I think everybody saw the story. The 10-month-old baby who received the world's first personalized gene editing treatment was released from the hospital. I mean, this is really exciting stuff. It looks like CRISPR gene editing tech saved his life. Yeah. When does this treatment not make headlines? When will more patients get it?
We have to scale the approach. I think what's very exciting about baby KJ, beyond the immediate impact on him and his family, is the opportunity to make this technology available to many more people. And that's exactly where our institute is focused.
Jennifer, is this the holy grail in terms of fixing all that ails us? Like, do you see it going to a point where we're born and we're scanned and we see, here's the problems, and we do the edit at an early basis? Like, is that where this goes?
Well, maybe in the future. I think at the moment, what we're looking at in the near term is an opportunity to fix rare disease mutations.
I mean this in a good way.
And that's great.
Right?
But in the future, what about for others, for kind of more broadly, what kind of impact is it going to have? I think in the future, we're looking at opportunities to prevent disease.
Yeah, exactly. How do we get there?
Yeah.
What's needed? Is it 20? And also how long?
Well, I think a couple things. One is I'd love to see us scale the N of 1, the rare disease approach, because I think that creates a pipeline for expanding the opportunities for more patients to participate. And then secondly, I think we have to continue to look for ways to ensure that editing is done safely and effectively. What are the right ways to regulate it? What are the right ways to test it? That's all key to expanding it into more patients.
I want to talk funding here for research, because in 2023, American universities received about $60 billion in funding. That went to every single state in the U.S., universities in every state. Much of it's gone to research. That's at risk right now. How has public funding fueled your pioneering work?
Well, we had a grant from the Department of Energy. It was our very first grant to work on CRISPR. And I met with the Secretary of Energy last week. I told him that if we hadn't had that grant, we couldn't have started the research. So it's really important that we have federal dollars to support curiosity-driven science that drive new innovation.
Is that at risk right now?
It's a risk. It is. And the other thing I think to point out is that the federal funding of science creates a huge, highly trained workforce here in the United States that create the people that are trained to go into pharmaceutical companies, to go into biotech. A lot of them become entrepreneurs here in the Bay Area and elsewhere. They drive the future with innovation.
What would you say, Jennifer, to people who are listening and say, well, I don't understand why an academic institution like a Harvard or that has a multi-billion-dollar endowment, why do they need federal money, to do R&D? So help us understand why that is so important for America and our academic universities and institutions to have that federally funded research. Why is that so important?
Well, it's very important because we need to fund the kind of out there, high risk, but potentially very high benefit research that drives the future. Companies aren't going to do that. Investors don't want to put money into things that are unproven.
And universities aren't going to do that on their own?
They can't. They just don't have the resources to do it. Private universities that have, resources that go beyond what we have at public schools like mine can do maybe more than the rest of us, but most universities simply do not have the funding to support science.
I want to push because you understand this world. So what if they say, well, wait a minute, so don't build another football stadium or don't, you know what I mean? Like, spend that money on doing R&D if it's so important.
Right, but I think, the thing to understand is that the federal government has traditionally invested in science really since World War II ended in a way that has returned more than $2.50 for every dollar invested. And that comes from the companies founded, the intellectual property, the patents issued, all of the inventions that have been created, all of the cures that we're now seeing, CRISPR and other things. That is really a direct result of federal funding.
We're seeing a decline of interest, it seems like, from venture capitalists right now in funding these types of companies. Back in 2020, VC money raised for gene therapy companies peaked $3.3 billion. It's been moving lower since to just a few $100 million last year. That's according to Dealforma. What's going on here?
I think that, I've been around a few years and I've seen some cycles, and this is not unexpected in biotech. This has happened before. I think what happens is that, sometimes there's, we go through moments when there's a lot of excitement about a field or maybe even a whole sector like biotech, and that was true in the early 2020s. And then there was a kind of a check on that, people realizing that, gosh, it's hard to make drugs, and it takes a bit of time. And so I think there's been a pullback. I think that the baby KJ story and some of the other things happening right now with gene editing in particular are just so inspiring that I'm hopeful that investors will re-engage and realize the opportunity ahead.
Speaking of engaging, and kind of back to the policy side of this, have you had a chance to speak with Vinay Prasad, the new head of the FDA's division that oversees gene editing?
I think the FDA has played a central role in regulating new therapies like CRISPR. They are clearly excited about the opportunities that the story of baby KJ offer, and I think we have a great partnership with them.
You mentioned the other things that gene editing are doing, and maybe not everything gets into the headlines, but give us an idea of kind of the broad impact or the broader impact that it maybe has already had?
Right. Well, a couple things immediately come to mind. One is programming immune cells to fight cancer. That's ongoing with CRISPR, and there are many companies and academic groups working on that. We have opportunities in other areas like cardiovascular disease. And then, thinking ahead, looking at ways that we might treat neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's, et cetera. I think that's also a very interesting opportunity with CRISPR.
One thing I always wonder is that there is a massive business already established in treating cancer and Alzheimer's and so many different things. Does that ever slow the progress of something that has the potential to be so impactful, like gene editing? I'm always curious about that disconnect. It's a big business, right? Taking care of all of us and what ails us, especially as we get older.
It is, and both cancer and heart disease are really multiple diseases, aren't they? I mean, there's a lot going on there. Same with neurodegenerative disease. So I think the answer is we just need everything we have to treat these disorders.
That's Jennifer Doudna, founder of the Innovative Genomics Institute and a Nobel laureate in chemistry.
You're listening to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek. Coming up, more conversations from our trip out west to the Bloomberg Tech Summit. I'm Carol Massar with Tim Stenovec.
This is Bloomberg.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Listen live each weekday starting at 2 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Welcome back to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, taking a look at some of our favorite conversations from the Bloomberg Tech Summit.
Up next, we hear from Peggy Johnson, CEO of Agility Robotics.
Robots in warehouses doing repetitive tasks that humans now do, but doing them better and not getting injured. Carol, it sounds like the stuff of the future, but Agility Robotics is one of the few companies that's doing this right now.
Yeah, they really are. Check this out. It's got 5'9" robots working at a warehouse containing products made by Spanx. It has technology and testing at Amazon.com facilities. And that really makes Agility really one of the few humanoid bot companies with machines currently performing useful tasks for customers. If you were wondering if it's happening, folks, it's happening.
Peggy is the former CEO of the augmented reality tech firm Magic Leap. She's held senior roles at Microsoft and Qualcomm. She joins us here in San Francisco at the Bloomberg Tech Summit. Welcome. It's been reported that companies are testing Digit, your humanoid robot. It's what we're talking about. When will it go beyond testing, though, to actually scale? Apparently, there are only about 100 of these that are out in the field right now.
Well, we have gone beyond testing. We are actually commercially deployed as of 1 year ago in GXO facilities, which is a third-party logistics provider who sends Spanx out.
You know Mr. Jacobs well at this point.
We do.
So,
yeah.
How many are out there in the field?
Right now, there's a handful of them, but they're getting ready to scale.
More than 100?
Oh, total, we have about 100 out in the field that the company has made. But at GXO, we have a handful of those, but they're looking at next steps on how to scale that beyond that facility.
Peggy, is it all about logistics, at least for the beginning and for a long time? I'm just curious how this explodes.
Yeah, that was the right entry point for a couple of reasons. One is the robot is capable of doing that today. It was made for work. It can pick up heavy containers, even if things are rolling around in it, and still be stable and set it down. It can move things from A to B over and over and over again. Logistics happens to be an area where there's a huge labor gap. Mm-hmm. These are challenging jobs, very physically challenging. They have repetition. They're a little bit mind-numbing. They're just hard jobs, cause a lot of injuries and things. Hard to fill these jobs. So because of that demand, we are able to bring our robots in.
How expensive are they and how quickly do they kind of make sense on a financial basis?
You don't have to pay for their health care.
That's true.
You don't have to pay their salaries.
That is so right.
I'm just throwing it out there.
There's no vacation time, although there is maintenance.
They don't fight with each other.
Yet.
Yet.
You haven't seen Terminator, I guess.
Exactly. No, but seriously, how much do they cost? And for a company, how quickly does it make sense?
Yeah, right now we talk about them in the range, very low volume of, say, a luxury vehicle. But that's coming down very, very quickly with volume. We believe we have line of sight to about 25K, 30K for these industrial robots. We'll be in that environment for a while now before, say, we get into the homes where I think the price is going to have to come down much, much further.
The big risk that, by the way, we're speaking with Peggy Johnson, CEO of Agility Robotics. Peggy, the sort of golden goose of this stuff is working alongside humans in a way that's not at a risk to the health of the humans, where a robot's not going to like bump them and hurt them. How do you do that? Because that seems to be something that is really, really challenging.
It is super challenging.
These guys got to work alone right now.
Exactly. They have to today work inside of a work cell, which are these gates that go up about waist high. It keeps humans back. Because
it keeps humans back and not robots caged?
Yeah, right. Because they're very curious.
You know how I'm thinking about this.
They're very curious. Humans want to get in there and see them. So it keeps humans back. But the robots themselves are human-sized, and sometimes they fall. They trip or things just like humans do. And so you have to be able to handle those situations in a very controlled manner. Sometimes they're carrying 50 pounds of weight. That has to be something that you bring the robot down in a very controlled way so that no one gets hurt. You don't want an arm coming around. How do you do that? Super challenging. We figured it out at Agility, and we'll be demoing that before the end of the year. It's called cooperative safety. Okay. We can be around humans.
You know, one thing that I've learned over the last few months is that China is doing this really, really well. We have reports that there's a higher density of robots per human on Chinese factory floors than here in the US and then here in Japan. A source featured in a Bloomberg story just a couple weeks ago said there are 50 or 60 companies in China he thinks working on humanoid development now. Are we behind?
I would say yes and no. They do have a plethora of robots out there. Some of what is termed humanoids aren't actually. I mean, humanoids usually have 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. Some of them are simple robot arms and things like that. So if we separate those out and say, just what are the humanoids doing, there's very few that we see doing real heavy industrial work. Oftentimes it's very lightweight, it's only a handful of skills. I think from an innovation standpoint, the U.S. is still ahead of China in this area.
Okay.
Well, so wait a minute. So, because I think we think about like the automation part that China has done really, really well. But you're saying with humanoids, you think the U.S. is ahead?
I think we are still ahead. We have not seen, first of all, safety incorporated in their humanoids. You must have safe humanoids. You cannot let them out of the work cell where the big markets are without that. You need an E-stop, for instance, an emergency stop on the back. You need to hit that if something goes wrong. It's just like an electronic vehicle.
Can I get one for this?
They do have that in The Wild Robot, the best-selling children's book.
Well,
they do.
Okay, see, they're ahead.
They are ahead.
So I am curious about oversight, though. What is the capacity for someone to go in and affect a program? Like, how does it work? Once a humanoid is out there, are they completely independent? Or is there some oversight? Like, how does this work?
So a couple things. We are actually working with the U.S. government on the standards for humanoids. None exist right now. They need to exist.
Who do you work with on that?
We work with a group called A3, and they then input the results of that into folks like OSHA.
Part of defense? Oh, no.
Would it go under David Sachs at all? In his AI czar role, in his crypto
role? It will probably cross paths with David at some point.
All right, so continue.
Yeah.
So what else? So you're working on these standards.
You need that. But we've taken safety seriously from day one. Because of the power in these machines, you have to take it seriously. If if something should happen, you don't want an arm to fling around and knock you over and do perhaps more damage. So that and also the data on it has to stay very protected, just like anything in a corporate IT infrastructure. You've got to keep the data protected. So we think of all of those things in a combination.
Are they using data from the cloud? Do they have their own on-site, on-premise?
Both.
We
have quite a bit of compute on the robot itself, and we're also connected to the cloud. We need to step into an enterprise environment. So we have to plug into their warehouse management systems. We have to talk to the other types of robots like autonomous mobile carts and conveyor belts. Those are all types of automation. And we have to talk to all of those in order to work safely in that environment. And by the way, to take over those tasks that they can't find humans for, we have to be able to plug in as if it was a human.
You're not the only one here in the U.S. who's working on this. I don't know if you saw Brett Adcock from Figure AI was here. They're also working on humanoids. How does your robot differ from Brett's?
Well, we're here today with our robot who will walk autonomously onto the stage today and upon my input will execute on my commands. So that's one big difference.
And it sounds like the Figure AI robot does not do that at this point?
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
It possibly
Has
might,
anyone
but I
seen
haven't
it?
seen it. I don't know.
Okay.
I couldn't. You could ask Brett.
Well, we could do, Carol, do you remember that show many years ago? This is like when I was a kid. BattleBots?
Yeah.
Where they had like remote control cars, robots that would like violently attack each other. I could see like a little cage match between...
Actually, you've seen some video over in China of like
Yeah.
different robots kind of doing that.
Digit and like a Figure AI robot.
Yeah, we actually have really taken a stand that we would never arm our general purpose robots.
Oh, that's good to know.
We need to
I
have
appreciate
trust.
that.
We first and foremost have to have trust with the humans. So we won't
just
arm
the fact
them.
that we have to, the fact that she has to say that, I think, is the story.
No, it is a story. Like I'm thinking, we just talked about drones in terms of how that's impacting warfare, and I just think about all this stuff getting into the wrong hands. Like, how do we control that?
Well, we've already seen some of that out of China. You see armed humanoids in videos and things. I think the U.S. has to have a response to that, obviously, and that they should have that kind of tech.
Right.
My point is our current general purpose robots are not meant for that at all.
Okay.
And because we need to build trust in the environment.
Will you rule out ever using your robots for security purposes?
I mean, we'd never rule that out. I just want to make it very clear that what we have today is not meant for that. And you do see videos of that coming out of general purpose robots in China.
Yeah, I will say that.
And that is terrifying.
What we've read, startups are doing trials in China from sorting garbage, delivering medicines in nursing homes. They're thinking about using these for elder care, but also patrolling the streets alongside police officers. And on the other hand, guiding museum tours.
Yeah. Those are all great use cases.
Patrolling is a great use case?
I think it is, because you're putting a human in harm's way every time a policeman walks out onto the street. I think better to have a robot. I think but
it doesn't have to be armed.
It doesn't. Yeah, it better in a hazardous situation. There's been some sort of nuclear problem. Send a robot in. Don't send in humans.
I want to ask you. Citi recently projected that the market for the machines, humanoids, and related services will surge to about $7 trillion by 2050, and the world could be populated by 648 million human-like bots by then. What might that world look like? Take us there.
Well, I think that world doesn't happen first until there's safety. So we have to show that these robots can be side by side with humans in a very safe manner. But then you should think of it as a tool in the same way farmers used to plow fields with oxen, and now they have machines that do it. This will be a tool that will give you choice. Some people might want to use their robot to cook. You might enjoy cooking. You say, no, just do the laundry for me. So that is, you could think of it as giving you choice to take manual labor off your hands.
So we could have, every household has their own humanoid robot to do tasks. Like it'll be affordable.
I would save 2 hours a night.
Right?
With stuff that I do every day.
But I mean, you could see every household having one.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, funding, how you're thinking about the business. The information reported just a couple months ago in March that you're raising $400 million at a pre-investment valuation of $1.75 billion. Can you give us an update? Has that round closed?
That is ongoing, and we have the funds will be used to make our next generation robot, which is going to be awesome. It's going to have a 10-to-1 work-to-charge ratio on batteries, which means 100 minutes of work, 10 minutes of charge, it's back out there on the floor again. It can take full shifts. It's going to be amazing.
How many more rounds, just 10 seconds, how many more rounds of financing do you foresee?
I think this is it.
That's Peggy Johnson, CEO of Agility Robotics.
You're listening to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek. Coming up, more conversations from our trip out west to the Bloomberg Tech Summit. I'm Carol Massar with Tim Stenovec.
This is Bloomberg.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Catch us live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Listen on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business App. Or watch us live on YouTube.
Welcome back to a special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, taking a look at some of our favorite conversations from the Bloomberg Tech Summit.
Up next, we hear from Osi Imyokparia, CEO of Code with Klossy.
For years, we've been talking easily about learning to code being pretty much a guarantee to getting a good job. Keep in mind...
Just learn to code, Carol.
That's
what they told us.
Said.
Learn to code.
Let your kids grow up to be coders. Yeah. Because basically every company is a technology company, and they need coders to kind of manage their businesses, grow their businesses. It's been all about that. So many stories about those who've gone to coding boot camps and then found very lucrative work at some of the biggest tech companies. But there is a question now, and you know it if you've been listening to us here from San Francisco, about AI and software applications that maybe can teach anybody, Tim and me, to be coders.
Yeah, so should we actually be teaching coding if that's the world we're entering? We're going to pose this question to Osi Imyokparia, CEO of Code with Klossy. It's a nonprofit that works, in its own words, to close the gender equity gap in tech. Osi joins us here on site at the Bloomberg Tech Summit in San Francisco. It's great to see you. It's been more than a year.
Hi, friends.
Since we've spoken
nice to
have
you. Back.
A lot has happened.
Yes.
I don't think we talked about AI at all.
No, we didn't have time.
So that's the question that I have for you.
Yes.
Are we in an environment right now where we should actually be telling these young kids to learn how to code?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question of the hour, so thank you for posing it. I think when we think about the work that we do, we're actually thinking more broadly than actually time spent hands on keyboard producing code. There is a lot that you can learn from a set of skills that are durable and transferable when you learn to code. You're learning computational thinking, you're learning a way of solving problems, decomposing them. You're learning to find patterns and create abstractions. You're learning to think algorithmically. These are all skills that we believe are transferable to problem solving in any domain.
What's it? It's called Code with Klossy now.
It's called Code with Klossy, yeah.
Should it be called Code with Klossy? Should it be called something else?
Well, maybe. I mean,
What's the term that you would use to
so we
that
think
encompasses
about
all of this?
Technical literacy, technical fluency.
Doesn't have the same ring to it.
Doesn't have the same ring. Branding aside, we've always had that sort of ethos to the work that we do, that really we are as proud of the young people in our programs who go on to get CS degrees as we are of the ones who don't. So we have folks in our community, for instance, one young woman who became a lawyer, right, and took her fluency in technology to help create technical policy, right? And so the point that we're making is that technology is infused in all parts of our life. And if you want to have a fruitful career, you should know fundamental technology skills.
But what kind of technology skills? I was listening to you before describe that, the advantages of people learning to recognize patterns and some different things. And it said to me, wow, God, that sounds like AI and that sounds like a large language model. So I'm just kind of trying to understand what the future generations or younger generations, what in technology do they really need to know? Because I feel like at this point, they really need to know how to converse with a chatbot or with AI to get smart answers. So help me understand how you guys see this evolution of what they need to learn when it comes to technology.
Sure. So when you think about producing a product in the world, there's more than just developing the code, right? Part of it is understanding what is possible with technology. What's the problem I want to solve first and foremost with technology? How do I make trade-offs among all the different features that I might put in that product? So the actual process related to building technology and putting it into the world and finding value and product market fit, as they like to say, is a process that involves a fluency with the technology beyond just producing the code. Yes, it is helpful to have a software agent or AI-assisted software help you produce the lines of code that are necessary, but you need that background in technology to architect the system, to maintain the system, to figure out how to integrate it with other parts of the world and other partners, right? So the fluency and, again, the confidence to understand how technology works is still going to be a baseline requirement. We may spend zero time spending, time coding because AI assistants or agents are doing that for us.
Right.
But we're using our fundamental understanding of the technology to advance the field. And then I would say there's still room in innovation on the frontier models, in chip design, right? These are all still places where we haven't reached the apex. We still want to make progress in these fundamental foundation technologies. And so we need people who are still getting the PhDs and studying this sort of basic fundamentals that are going to help advance the next inflection point in computing that we haven't yet discovered.
Right.
Before we let you go, we just spoke to Tom Giles, our senior executive editor for Global Technology here, and he said one of the big takeaways is the conversation in tech policy and what's going on in Washington. And I'm curious because you worked at tech companies, you worked in philanthropy, you worked in politics, you worked on Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. When it comes to tech policy right now, what is the White House doing right and wrong in your view when it comes to tech?
Well, look, I think the executive order sort of highlighting the importance of having AI education broadly accessible, I think that is a good statement to make. In general, as we're thinking about building a future workforce and thinking about American competitiveness globally, I think that is something that I can get behind.
That's Osi Imyokparia, CEO of Code with Klossy.
Up next, we hear from Ashley Mayer, co-host of the Great Chat podcast.
Hey, listen, very much to a part of our world today. We've got a podcast. Everybody's got a podcast. Great Chat, though, is a new one that debuted, I think, about 3 months ago. Episodes include conversations that can kind of go in a lot of places. LLMs, AI maybe taking our jobs, the best place to do a startup. That's as likely to be heard as our hoarding eggs, Forever 21's demise, and also views on the new code.
We've got with us here at the Bloomberg Tech 25, Ashley Mayer, co-host of the Great Chat podcast. Ashley, co-founder and general partner at the early venture firm Coalition Operators.
Tell us about this podcast, because my understanding, I think it was a LinkedIn post that you guys talked about, I think you did, that it was like a feisty dinner and all of a sudden here we got to a podcast. Tell us about what you guys were thinking and the mission here.
Yeah, I mean, be careful before you go to a dinner with a group of friends because you might end up starting a podcast. The five of us had a dinner last fall. It was a fun, feisty conversation about the tech industry, and we joked at that dinner, maybe we should have a podcast. There are so many podcasts that are, more news-driven, more informational, have guests, but we sort of thought that maybe a more conversational format was good, and so that podcast turned into a group chat. And that group chat turned into a podcast, and Great Chat was born.
Can I say it almost felt like Sex in the City for the tech world, a little bit, because you guys will cover a lot of what's going on in the world more generally, but then you'll talk about, some executive moving to Meta or something, and you kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it.
Sex in the City for nerds, maybe. And I think what we try to do is demystify a lot of the headlines everyone's seeing. I mean, the five of us have worked in tech our whole careers as investors, operators, founders. My co-host Sally has been in media herself. And so we try to break down like the biggest headlines, the biggest topics in tech and make them accessible, especially to a younger generation of people coming into this industry.
You guys are venture capitalists, so you understand that things need to make money eventually.
Yes.
We're in a world where anyone can do a podcast, so there's a big difference between sort of the Caller Daddies and Joe Rogans of the world and then the newer entrants that don't necessarily have the traction. Is this right now making money? Is the goal for it to make money?
No, not currently, although, never say never. We're very much in scrappy mode. We're really doing this from a place of we saw a gap in the ecosystem, and if I'm going to be a little feisty here myself, we found one of the few areas of white space in tech commentary, which is that we're all women. And we felt like a lot of the biggest voices in the tech industry were very loud, very prominent, often billionaire men, and we thought maybe we could bring a different lens.
You're not saying any names, but I think I know who you're talking about.
There may be a podcast. It's a group of four men who are very loud. And
I did watch Mountainhead.
It sounds like Milan.
On HBO. I don't know if you watched Mountainhead on HBO. I'm just throwing it out there.
Fun fact, I worked for one of those podcast hosts back in the day.
What did you learn?
Well, I learned the power of narrative. And the stories we tell each other and ourselves about our industry determine who gets funded, who gets the benefit of the doubt, where top talent goes, and this stuff really matters.
But it's so indicative of how many conversations have we had about women in tech, and specifically female-founded companies just fighting for capital and to get recognized. Why is that still a problem? And how can you guys use your format and your platform to maybe help that?
Yeah.
And also as venture capitalists in your own right.
Totally. And I mean, I'm an emerging fund manager myself. I have to raise money for my fund. And so it's very much a thing. Listen, I think just having examples of people who are maybe underrepresented, who are visible, who are doing the thing and putting ourselves out there.
Right.
I mean, we're very much in this like anti-DEI era, which comes with both, I think, some negative implications for how people are focusing their time and efforts. But at the end of the day, we all get to put our chips on the table and build things ourselves and elevate other people who are doing it.
Ashley, this pushback against DEI, pushback against women, pushback against anyone who maybe isn't just a white male born in America. That's kind of how it feels right now.
Yeah.
With your platform, are you afraid to speak out against that? I mean, because I think there is a lot of fear among leaders about, the White House either hearing something and not liking it. So tell me about that, and how does it make it also harder for you guys to raise money?
Yeah, I mean, I am at a small fund.
Yeah.
And so I'm not too worried about President Trump watching this interview and coming at me. And listen, I think at the end of the day, my job as an investor is to fund the very best founders I can find. I do super early stage investing, so it really is a bet on the founder. I don't have a diversity mandate. We never have at Coalition, but we have very diverse networks, a diverse pipeline of deals, and so we have a diverse portfolio. And in an ideal world, that's how it works, in my opinion, right? Versus having to have dedicated programs, specific sleeves of dollars going to early stage founders. I think that, as the venture ecosystem diversifies, the pool of founders who get capital will diversify as well.
Ashley, before we let you go,
Yeah.
Curious about what's exciting to you out there. We're not in an ecosystem in technology where venture capitalists are throwing money at app-based games or food delivery apps or that sort of thing right now. A lot of it's going into robotics. A lot of it's going into AI.
Yeah.
Where are you seeing the money go? What's exciting to you?
I mean, excited about a lot of the macro trends that other people are. I have a partner who is actively building a company in the AI space called Tribe AI. We see incredible AI deal flow from her, and she also sort of really has a real-time pulse on what the biggest AI platforms are doing, how enterprises are adopting. I have another partner who runs City Block Health, which is a massive healthcare startup. We're seeing incredible breakthroughs in the healthcare ecosystem, especially the intersection of health and AI. But at the highest level, I think there's never been a better time to be an emerging investor and an early stage investor, because so many things are changing about the world, right? From a technological perspective, the AI platform shift is really changing everything. From a regulatory perspective, I mean, it's a little bit of a wild west, but change is generally good for early stage startups. Culturally and from a media perspective, the way startups build their brands, go to market, find their customers is changing. And so that for me is so exciting. These moments of change are where the most opportunity comes from.
That's Ashley Meyer, co-host of the Great Chat podcast.
And that does it for this special edition of Bloomberg Businessweek, focusing on our favorite conversations from the Bloomberg Tech Summit this past week in San Francisco.
This is the Bloomberg Businessweek Daily Podcast. Available on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. Listen live weekday afternoons from 2 to 5 p.m. Eastern on Bloomberg.com, the iHeartRadio app, TuneIn, and the Bloomberg Business App. You can also watch us live every weekday on YouTube and always on the Bloomberg Terminal.